At Christmas, my daughter-in-law looked at me with that polite smile of hers and said, "We're celebrating at my mom's this year. You stay home, okay?" I didn't argue. I just smiled back, nodded, and said, "Of course, dear." But inside, something broke a little. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year, full of laughter, warmth, and family. And now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't welcome at my own son's table. So I packed my bags. 2 days later, while they were busy posing for family photos at someone else's dinner table, I was standing on the deck of a yacht, the ocean sparkling all around me. When my daughter-in-law saw the picture I posted, she went completely pale because the man standing next to me wasn't just anyone. And the story of how I got there changed my life forever. Before we go on, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. This is a story about how being left out led me to Christmas I'll never forget. My name is Nora Bennett. I'm 63 years old, a retired nurse and a widow. My husband Daniel passed away 20 years ago in a car accident. He was the love of my life, steady, kind, and the kind of man who always made the holidays feel like home. After he died, Christmas became my way of keeping his spirit alive. Every December, I'd decorate the house just the way he liked it. Twinkling lights on the porch, cinnamon candles in every room, and his favorite Christmas songs playing in the background. My son Ethan would always come over to help me set up the tree. We'd drink hot cocoa, laugh about old memories, and for a few hours, everything felt whole again. But that changed after he married Harper. Harper is a beautiful woman, polished, confident, and always perfectly put together. She runs a small interior design business and loves to talk about her clients and travel plans. She's polite to me, always smiling, but there's a distance in her eyes, the kind that says, "You don't quite fit in here." At first, I thought it was my imagination, but as the years passed, little things started to hurt more than I wanted to admit. They started spending less time at my house, skipping small traditions we used to share. When I'd suggest watching a Christmas movie or baking cookies, Harper would always find a reason why they couldn't. Then, one afternoon a week before Christmas, Ethan called, "Mom, we wanted to talk about the holiday plans." I smiled through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. Should I make my gingerbread cookies again this year?" Before he could answer, I heard Harper's voice in the background. She said, cheerful as ever, "Oh, Nora, don't worry about that. We're doing Christmas at my mom's this year. It's just going to be us and her side of the family. You stay home and relax, okay?" My heart dropped, but I didn't let it show. "That sounds lovely," I said softly. "I'll be just fine." Ethan didn't say a word, not a single word. When I hung up, I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a long time. The house was silent. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine, but suddenly it felt cold. I looked at the Christmas tree I'd just finished decorating, the same ornaments from when Ethan was a boy, and my eyes filled with tears. I could have called back. I could have argued or reminded them that I'd been alone for too many Christmases already, but I didn't, because I knew that if people truly want you around, you never have to beg for space at their table. That night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my computer. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to distract myself when I saw an unread email sitting at the bottom of my inbox. It was from Richard Hale, an old friend from years ago. We'd worked together when I was still nursing, back when life was simpler and my hair wasn't quite this gray. The subject line read, "An old friend reaching out." I opened it, curious. He had written, "Nora, I hope this message finds you well. I'm in Florida now, working with a medical foundation. If you ever need an escape or want to see the ocean again, I'd love to catch up. Some people say I'm hard to find, but the sea always knows where I am." I read that line over and over again. The sea always knows where I am. For some reason, it felt like an invitation, not just to visit, but to start living again. The next morning, he woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, the air still cold. I looked around and realized that I didn't want to spend another Christmas waiting for people to remember I existed. So, I opened my laptop, searched for flights, and did something I hadn't done in years. Something bold. I booked a ticket to Florida. I didn't tell anyone. Not Myson, not Harper, not a single person. When the confirmation email hit my inbox, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: excitement. I stood by the window watching the sun rise and whispered to myself, if there's no room for me at their table, maybe it's time I find my own. That was the beginning of everything. 2 days before Christmas, the world outside my window looked like a postcard. Soft snow falling, rooftops dusted in white, and families hurrying through the streets with bags of gifts and laughter. Inside my house, the silence was almost too loud. My suitcase sat by the door, neatly packed. I kept glancing at it, half expecting someone to call to say, "Mom, what are you doing for Christmas?" But my phone stayed quiet. By mid-morning, I had a car waiting to take me to the airport. I locked up the house, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment by the tree. The ornaments sparkled faintly in the dim light, each one a memory. The angel on top had been my husband's favorite. I touched it gently, whispered, "Wish me luck, Daniel," and closed the door behind me. The flight to Florida was peaceful. I watched clouds drift past the window and tried to quiet the mix of sadness and anticipation swirling inside me. I didn't know exactly what awaited me there. I only knew I needed to breathe again, to feel something other than being left behind. When I landed, the warm breeze hit me the moment I stepped outside. It felt like stepping into another world, one filled with color, warmth, and life. Palm trees swayed against a bright blue sky, and the air smelled faintly of salt and sunscreen. A black SUV was waiting near the curb with a driver holding a sign that said, "Miss Bennett." My heart skipped. Richard had arranged this. The drive to the marina was quiet, but my eyes couldn't stop moving. The ocean stretched endlessly, sparkling under the sun. When we arrived, I saw it. A beautiful white yacht, polished and elegant, named the Serenity. Standing near the dock was Richard Hale, exactly as I remembered him, only wiser looking. His hair was silver now, his skin slightly tanned, and his eyes carried that same calm kindness that had once made me feel safe during long hospital shifts. "Nora Bennett," he said, smiling as he walked toward me. "You really came." I said I would, I replied, though my voice shook a little. "You haven't changed much," he teased gently. Still brave enough to surprise everyone, he offered his hand to help me aboard. And the moment my feet touched the deck, I felt lighter. The gentle sway of the boat, the sound of waves against the hull. It was soothing in a way I didn't realize it needed. Inside, the yacht was luxurious but not showy. Cream-colored furniture, fresh flowers, and sunlight pouring through wide windows. Richard led me to the upper deck where a small table was set for lunch. "I hope you're hungry," he said. "You've got a lot of catching up to do, and so do I." Over the next few hours, we talked about everything. The years we'd missed, the people we'd lost, the strange ways life changes when you're not paying attention. I told him about Ethan, about Harper, about how I'd quietly faded out of my own family story. He listened without judgment, his expression soft. "Nora," he said finally, "you spent your whole life giving. As a nurse, as a mother, as a wife. Maybe it's time you let the world give something back." That sentence has stayed with me. For the first time, someone wasn't pitying me or telling me to understand how busy everyone is. Instead, he reminded me that I still mattered. The next morning, we set sail along the coast. The water shimmered like glass, the sky endless and bright. I felt free, not just from my house or my loneliness, but from the weight of being unwanted. Richard introduced me to his small crew, all kind people who treated me with genuine warmth. They called me Miss Nora and made sure I always had a seat by the railing during meals. We spent the days exploring islands and the nights watching the stars. I laughed more in those 3 days than I had in years. Somewhere between the ocean breeze and the laughter, I remembered what it felt like to be alive, to be more than someone's forgotten parent. Back home, meanwhile, Ethan and Harper were celebrating Christmas at her mother's house. I didn't know it yet, but that night, while Harper scrolled through social media, she stumbled upon something that froze her in place. There it was, a photo of me on the Serenity standing next to Richard. The post had been shared by a local news page covering charity events in the area. The caption read, "Philanthropist Richard Hale, spotted with longtime friend and retired nurse Nora Bennett as they prepare for holiday outreach on his private yacht. In the photo, I was smiling, genuinely smiling, wearing a sun hat, wind in my hair, eyes bright. The comment section was full of kind words, people praising the foundation, some even recognizing me from my old hospital days. Harper's hand trembled as she read the comments. Ethan leaned over and asked, "What's wrong?" She turned the phone toward him, his face went blank. "That's Mom," he whispered. Harper nodded slowly, her voice tight. "Yes, and that's Richard Hale. He's one of the biggest donors in the state." Ethan didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the picture for the first time. He looked uncertain, like he was realizing how much he'd underestimated the woman who raised him back on the yacht. I didn't know any of that yet. I just sat on the deck that night watching the moonlight dance on the water and whispered to myself, maybe Left Behind was the best thing that ever happened to me. When I woke up the next morning on the yacht, Thesky was painted in soft pinks and golds. The gentle rocking of the boat and the sound of waves felt like a lullaby I'd waited years to hear. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about who might need me or who had forgotten me. I was simply existing, and it felt peaceful. Richard was already on deck sipping coffee and reading something on his tablet. He looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Nora. I didn't want to wake you. You looked so at peace." I sat beside him watching the horizon. "It's strange," I said quietly. "I've spent so many holidays surrounded by people but felt invisible. Now I'm miles away from home and somehow I finally feel seen." He nodded. "That's the thing about distance. It doesn't just take you away from others. It brings you closer to yourself." We spent the next few hours talking not about the past, but about what came next. Richard told me about his foundation, how he funded clinics, supported retired nurses, and ran volunteer medical missions across the Caribbean. "We could use someone like you," he said thoughtfully. "Someone who understands people, who's lived what compassion really means." I laughed softly. "Richard, I've been retired for years. I wouldn't even know where to start." He smiled. "You'd start where you left off, by caring. The world needs that now more than ever." His words lingered. For so long, I'd believed my best years were behind me. I'd built my life around caring for others, and when that ended, I didn't know who I was anymore. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe life was still offering me another chapter. I just needed the courage to say yes. That afternoon, Richard invited me to join him on shore. "There's something I'd like you to see," he said. We took a small boat to a nearby island, quiet and untouched by tourists. It wasn't a vacation spot. It was a small clinic his foundation had helped build. Children played outside while nurses handed out food and supplies. A young woman approached me, smiling brightly. "You must be Nora. Richard told us you used to be a nurse." I nodded, surprised. "Yes, but it's been years." She took my hands and said, "Then you understand what this place means." I walked inside, and memories flooded back. The beeping monitors, the smell of antiseptic, the sound of voices in need. It didn't feel distant. It felt familiar. One of the nurses asked me to help organize some medical supplies. And before I knew it, hours had passed. The rhythm, the connection, the sense of purpose. It was all still there waiting for me. When we returned to the yacht that evening, Thesky was alive with color. Richard Paredes both a glass of wine and said, "I saw your face today. You looked like yourself again." I smiled. I didn't realize how much I missed it. Helping people, being part of something that matters. He leaned back in his chair. "So, what's stopping you?" I hesitated. Fear, I suppose. I've spent so long feeling small. It's hard to imagine being someone important again. Richard shook his head. "You were never small, Nora. You just forgot how much space you deserve to take up." That night, as I lay in my cabin, his words echoed in my mind. I thought about how easily I'd accepted being left out of my son's life. I'd told myself it was okay, that I didn't need to make a fuss. But deep down, I'd let that pain define me. Maybe it was time to stop waiting for others to choose me and start choosing myself. The next morning, I made my decision. I walked out onto the deck where Richard stood watching the sunrise. "You asked me yesterday what's stopping me," I said. "The answer is nothing. Not anymore. If the offer still stands, I'd like to help with the foundation." Richard turned home with a slow, warm smile. I was hoping you'd say that. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening after years of being locked. I wasn't just escaping loneliness anymore. I was stepping into a new life, one I hadn't even dared to imagine. Later that day, we sailed farther down the coast. I sent Ethan a short text just to check in. Hope you're having a wonderful Christmas. I'm safe and happy. I didn't mention where I was or who I was with. I didn't need to. Hours later, I saw the message indicator blink. It was Ethan, Mom. We saw your photo online. You're on a yacht with Richard Hale. Are you okay? I smiled and typed back. I'm more than okay. Then I put the phone down, looked out over the endless blue water, and let the wind carry away every bit of guilt I'd ever felt for choosing myself. This was my turning point, not a rebellion but a rebirth. For the first time in decades, I wasn't someone's mother, widow, or afterthought. I was simply Nora, capable, free, and alive. When I returned home a week after Christmas, the air felt different. The snow had begun to melt and the streets were quiet. I carried my suitcase inside and stood in my living room, looking around at the space that had once felt empty. Now it felt peaceful, like it finally belonged to me again. I unpacked slowly, placing a few souvenirs from Theact on the mantel, a small seashell, a framed photo Richard had taken of me laughing on deck, and a note that simply said, "To new beginnings." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman left behind. I felt like someone who had taken her life back. 2 days later, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw Ethan and Harper standing on the porch. Ethan looked unsure. Harper looked nervous, and I could tell from their expressions that they had seen everything online. "Mom," Ethan said softly, stepping forward. "Can we come in?" "Of course," I said, smiling. I led them to the living room. Harper's eyes darted to the photos on the mantel, her jaw tightening slightly when she saw Theone of me and Richard. Ethan spoke first. "We tried calling, but you didn't answer." "I was busy," I said gently, sitting down. "It was a wonderful trip." Harper folded her arms. "We saw that, Nora. You were on a yacht with Richard Hale." "The Richard Hale. Do you know who he is?" I met her eyes calmly. "Yes, he's a friend and a kind man. We've known each other for years." Harper blinked, clearly caught off guard. Years. Nodded. "We worked together when I was still nursing. We reconnected recently. He invited me to see what he's been working on." "His foundation?" Ethan looked at me, still struggling to find the right words. "Mom, you could have told us. We were worried." I smiled softly. "Ethan, you and Harper had your own plans." I didn't want to interrupt. The room went quiet. I could feel Harper shifting uncomfortably, the silence pressing down on her. For once, I didn't rush to fill it. I let it linger because, for years, I'd been the one to smooth over every awkward moment to make everyone else feel comfortable while I swallowed my own feelings. "Not this time." Ethan cleared his throat. "So are you two? Are you and Richard?" I laughed lightly. "Friends, Ethan. Just friends. Though I will say he reminded me that life isn't over just because it turned 60. Harper forced a smile. "Well, that's lovely." But her tone said otherwise. She wasn't used to me being confident, self-assured, or part of something she couldn't control. I stood up and poured tea for all of us. "You know," I said, handing them their cups, "I learned something on that trip. Sometimes when people leave you out, it's not because you don't belong. It's because you've outgrown the place they put you in." Harper looked up, startled by the honesty in my tone. "I spent years thinking I had to wait for an invitation," I continued. "To dinners, to holidays, to feeling loved. But you don't need an invitation to your own life." Ethan's eyes softened. "Mom, whenever meant to make you feel unwanted," I interrupted gently. "I know, honey. You didn't mean to, but you did. And that's okay because it pushed me to find myself again." Harper set her cup down. "We didn't realize you were unhappy." Ismailed kindly. "I wasn't unhappy. I was just quiet." "There's a difference." "But I'm done being quiet now." Ethan leaned forward. "So what happens now? Are you staying in touch with him?" "Yes," I said. "Richard offered me a role in his foundation. I'm going to help organize medical missions and retirement programs for nurses like me. It's part-time, but it's something meaningful." Ethan blinked, surprised. "Mom, that's incredible." Harper nodded, her voice smaller this time. That's really wonderful, Nora. For the first time, her tone wasn't polished or superior. It was genuine. Maybe she realized that the woman standing in front of her wasn't someone she could neatly set aside anymore. We talked a bit longer, catching up, but I could tell they were both trying to adjust to this new version of me. The one who didn't wait to be included. Before they left, Ethan hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, Mom. I mean that. When they drove away, I stood by the window, watching the snow start to fall again. I wasn't angry, Orbiter. I was simply a week later flew to New York with Richard for a foundation event. Cameras flashed as we stepped onto the red carpet together. Not because of glamour, but because Thestry had spread. A retired nurse finds a new purpose working alongside philanthropist Richard Hale. During the dinner, Richard raised a glass and said, "To second chances and to the people brave enough to take them." He looked at me as he said it, and I smiled back, knowing this wasn't about wealth or romance. It was about rediscovery. The moment you realize your worth was never gone, it was just waiting for you to claim it again. That night, as I stood on the yacht's deck under a canopy of stars, I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who quietly accepted being left out of Christmas. Now I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was. Not because I was someone's mother or someone's guest, but because I mattered on my own. And in that moment, with the sound of waves below and laughter all around, I whispered to myself, "This is my Christmas miracle." It's been a year since that Christmas, the one that changed everything. I still remember how small and unwanted I felt that day, sitting by my undecorated tree, wondering when my family stopped needing me. Now, when I think of that moment, I don't feel pain anymore. I feel gratitude because that was the day. I stopped waiting for someone else to include me and started choosing myself. Life since then has been beautifully unexpected. Joining Richard's foundation was one of the best decisions I've ever made. What began as a simple visit turned into a purpose I didn't realize I'd been missing. I now help coordinate outreach programs for nurses, offering them the same kind of second chance I was given. We travel, organize care clinics, and visit hospitals to support healthcare workers who've spent their lives helping others. It's fulfilling in a way I can't even describe. I've learned that life doesn't end at 60. It changes. Yes, it quiets down in some ways, but that quiet is where you finally hear your own voice again. I spent decades being a caretaker, a wife, a mother, and for years after my husband passed, I believed that part of me was all I'd ever be. But this last year proved something different. I am still a woman with dreams, with stories to write, and with a future to live. Ethan and Harper visit more often now. It's different, softer, more genuine. There's no tension when they come over, no silent guilt hanging in the air. Sometimes Harper brings a dish she's cooked herself, and I can see the efforts he's making. One afternoon, while we were decorating my tree together, she said quietly, "Nora, I didn't realize how unfair I was to you. I just thought I needed to have things my way. I didn't see how that made you feel." Her honesty surprised me. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, but then I smiled and said, "We all grow, Harper. Some of us just need a little time to see things differently." She nodded, and that moment, small and unassuming, felt like healing. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because we finally understood each other as people, not rivals. I think she saw me maybe for the first time, not as the woman standing in the background of her family, but as someone with her own story, her own strength. As for Ethan, he's been more present too. He calls just to check in, sends photos of their vacations, and even asked me to join them next Christmas. "We'll make it special. This time, Mom," he promised. I told him I'd think about it, not to play hard to get, but because I've learned that my time and presence are valuable. It feels good to be wanted, but it feels even better to know I don't need anyone's invitation to feel worthy. Richard and I remain close. We talk almost every day, and though people love to assume it's romantic, the truth is simpler. We're companions, two people who met again when life had already weathered us, who found peace in each other's company. Sometimes we travel for the foundation's work. Other times we just sit by the sea and watch the waves. He once told me, "You remind me that the most beautiful parts of life aren't in the beginning. They're in the middle when you least expect them." That sentence stayed with me. It's true. Because if someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd find joy on a yacht, friendship with an old flame, and peace in my own company, I would have laughed. But here I am, not the same woman who felt excluded and hurt, but one who learned that sometimes rejection isn't cruelty, it's direction. Every so often, I still get messages from old colleagues and even strangers who saw my story online. One woman wrote, "Nora, I was invited nowhere this Christmas. But after hearing your story, I took myself to the beach, watched the sunrise, and realized I don't need Audible to feel like I belong." That message made me tear up because it reminded me why stories matter. They show us we're not alone. Last Christmas, instead of waiting for an invitation, I invited a few neighbors who had nowhere to go. We cooked together, shared laughter, and told stories late into the night. The house was full again, not because of blood, but because of warmth. As I looked around the table, I realized that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people you find along the way, the ones who show up when you stop chasing approval and start opening your heart. Now, as I stand by my window watching the snow fall, I feel calm. I'm not bitter. I'm not lonely. I'm simply at peace with where I am and proud of the woman I've become. Sometimes life takes away the comfort, to show you the freedom you've been missing. That's what happened to me. Being told to stay home that Christmas wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything. So to anyone watching this who's ever felt left out or forgotten, I want you to remember this. You don't need permission to start living again. You don't need anyone's invitation to be happy. The world is wide and there's always a place waiting for you. You just have to find the courage to step into it. And if this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because maybe like me, you're ready to write your own new